Do the panel agree that listening to the speakers this morning, it's made me quite worried actually, not that it's the first time, but are we not witnessing the beginnings of perhaps the breakdown of society in Western Europe, which could in fact lead to perhaps not socialism, but fascism, as in the 1930s. I think we shouldn't underestimate the gravity of the situation, but I welcome your comments. Thank you.
Can I take another question before we come back to the panel on that? Oh, right beside that gentleman.
Yeah, this is more for Luís. In Germany, there was a thing in the Telegraph yesterday from Merkel stating that Europe's southern youth should move. And there was also another statement from her, is Germany has a shortage of skilled people. And so this forced migration from the south will be to Germany's benefit, and in the end robbing the south of Europe of its poor. Now, do you have any comments on that?
Shall we take those two? Either of you want to take?
Well, the fascism thing I think is interesting because I a little while ago was using so Luís mentioned the idea of a double movement. The guy who sort of coined this idea was a man called Karl Polanyi. In his fantastic book, The Great Transformation. And what he observed, he was writing this book during the Second World War, but he was writing it about Britain in the early 19th century, and observing that society can defend itself in ways that are very reactionary. And the rise of the far right in Greece or in Germany or in the United States, for that matter, or in India, is, I think, a source of great concern. And it's interesting that the far right defends it. You see the rise of these sort of mechanisms of defending society as a way of protecting the nation for the good of the people, for the good of the nation. We must do this, that, and the other. So, for example, in India, there's one of the ministers for finance, I think, was saying, yes, you have all these people protesting and the farmers wanting not to use GMOs and this, that, and the other, but everyone can have those rights as long as we have 7% annual growth. And he made it very clear that he was ready to suspend human rights in the name of development progress. So I think that the rise of a certain kind, the economic crisis and then the idea of needing growth to emerge out of it, and the solution needs to be, as Luís wonderfully said, an increased police state and reduce social welfare net, I think is a sign of what, certainly what incipient kind of global fascism looks like.
Before I hand over to Luís, which I will pronounce properly this time, do you think, Rosha, that there's a difference with modern day media, for example, social media, and the rise of that, the more connected global movements that can counteract some of that fascism trend? Well, or potential for fascism?
Well, just as in the 1930s, there was, there were strong socialist movements and there were strong anarchist movements. Those, I think media, the connected global media helps, but of course it helps the other side too. I wouldn't go one way or another and use it. I see that media as a tool, but the hard work of actually organizing on the ground is, I think, what's exciting about being in a movement right now and looking at how things like Occupy in the States have been moving forward, or how longer traditions of movements in the global South that have histories of fighting against colonialism and are still doing exactly that. I think that those are the kinds of movements that are going to be better organizing mechanisms than say, Facebook.
Okay. Luís, do you want to take both of those questions, maybe?
Okay. Do you hear me? Yeah. So about breakdown of society, again, as Raj said, fascism is actually an anti-market ideology. So I didn't mention Karl Polanyi's name because I tried to underplay my geek side, because I do tend to name drop a lot. I don't do it on purpose, but yeah. Now on to the real question. I don't think that if we look at breakdown of society in terms of collapse, that's in a sense incompatible with the rise of fascism, because fascism, neo-fascism in this sense, or or far-right ideologies, which are a little bit different, because I put down two more examples. They're not far, one of them at least is not far-right. So for instance, Shinzo Abe in Japan, the kind of economic policy that he put in place in the last 6 months, even though he is a right-wing nationalist, the kinds of politics he put in place, it runs completely counter to neoliberal orthodoxy. And this is very important to also take notice of. And also, for instance, Viktor Orban in Hungary, I don't know, you probably know or heard of what he's doing and the way in which he transformed Hungarian politics and society in a very, very short period. The ways in which Hungarian society has now institutionalized homophobia and homeless phobia. I don't know if the word exists, but anyway, you get the sense. These kinds of things also speak to us, because sometimes the danger only looking at, for instance, Marine Le Pen or those kinds of politicians with loony ideas that clearly have no traction or no real traction in everyday politics, even though she might go to the second round in French presidential elections. Probably what will happen if we talk about societal transition and the emergence of neo-fascist movements, they will become a part of institutionalized politics, as it has happened in Greece. But at the same time, I don't think we should overplay their size. For instance, Golden Dawn is probably the most media-savvy social and political movement in Europe right now, because it knows exactly those. I don't want to say the word in my head that I want to use to describe them, but those people know exactly where to show up, when to show up, what to say, what to do, and I would compare them to the welfare politics of, for instance, Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And I know this is controversial, and some of you might want to shove stones at me for saying this, but that's actually what's happening. And that's the way these people get more and more Greek vulnerable people to support them, because they are on the ground. They go to, for instance, there's a place in Athens, in central Athens, called Omonia, which was a very diverse, very rich area of the city. It was completely run down by the local councilman or councilwoman, I can remember. So it's now basically a wasteland with a bunch of hotels, a bunch of very nice stores, but nobody goes there apart from very vulnerable people, addicts. And you can guess who went there the day after that, Golden Dawn. And they set up shop, and they set up welcoming centers, they set up drug addiction treatment centers, they set up a thing called, you had Les Médecins Sans Frontières, the Medics Without Borders. Well, they actually founded the Medics With Borders, because they only accept Greeks, no migrants, no brown people, no black people, no people other than, well, it's not that, you know, as Mediterraneans, generally we have black hair, and so I don't really know how they distinguish between, well, one thing that I learned from looking at these neo-fascist movements, you don't try to put logic where it does not exist. So, yeah, move on. So just to wrap it up, I did think that we should be careful about looking at the emergence of these neo-fascist movements, but we should also be careful about the not-so-fascist neoliberal authoritarianism that is actually emerging within the European Union, within the ECB. This is perhaps the most, one of our struggles as a European attack network is to go against the ECB. That's why we support, for instance, Blockupy so strongly, to march against the ECB. That's something that we need to take care of. Now, on to the forced migration issue. Certainly there's a dramatic problem here, because migration, this migration process now from Southern Europe to the core, as it were, to Germany and Austria and the Netherlands and elsewhere. People going there are no longer unskilled labor, let's say that. People now have university degrees, they speak multiple languages, they are fluent in all sorts of things, and they still find the need to go there to find perhaps a job at a lower skill level than they would be entitled to, but they would be able to work at. So this month's Economist actually talks about that, because Germany is a very aged society, and it needs young skilled labor. So it's now trying to attract people to the country. But there's all sorts of barriers, societal barriers to integration, because the Gastarbeiter mindset is still there. And having lived there, I know about that. So what we see now is not only the return of capital, the capital flows from the periphery to Germany, but also human capital. I don't like the wording, but the people flowing also from the periphery to Germany, to Austria, to the core. And that's very disturbing, because that will further imbalance the European continent. And well, I don't have an answer, but that's certainly something we need to look out for. Yeah.
A couple more questions, please. Right there. Yes. Sorry. Microphone up there, and then there was a hand over here, and then.
Yeah, it was following on from the two questions we've just had, really. Presumably, the benefits that immigrants to Germany would deliver is not going to be distributed evenly. I was wondering, A, is there a potential for those jobs that they come into being insecure, and the possibility of sort of unemployment amongst immigrants, which, given the kind of narratives you were talking about, Luís, could that sort of be a sort of a potential asset to the far right?
Sorry, could you rephrase?
Sorry, I mean, is there a can you see a possibility of the immigrants that Germany takes in not having security of employment but staying there, and then which kind of feeds into the German media narratives about the lazy Southerners, and which could sort of also help the narrative of the far right?
Mm-hmm.
We can take this one really quickly, because there's some different, move on to some other topics. Very quickly, I don't think that the current wave of migration will have much of an impact, because those people, the people you're talking about, they're focused. They are still focused on the 70s and on the Turkish community. That's what's happening. Southern Europeans now. That's one of the good things of the Erasmus program and those kinds of things. So people are a bit more open-minded, and the target of those people, the far right, is a whole other bunch of people, not the current income. Yeah. We can take a couple of questions. So right there, yeah.
Hello, it's a question for Raj Patel, really. It's very easy to see how self-sufficiency in food and a peasant economy is very, very consistent with the idea of food sovereignty. It's a lot harder to see how that is any more than peripheral to the kind of food systems that we have at the moment, where over 50% of the world's population live in urban configurations. And how do you make that, how is it possible to make that join up?
Good question. Another question? Roger at the back there. Yeah. Sorry, the mic's coming around.
Yeah, Roger Manser from WDM. I was going to ask about to what extent our two speakers see examples of deglobalization taking place, either in Europe or in the global south. other than food sovereignty? Because most of us live in cities, so I'm work in industry. So what examples do you actually see of deglobalization moving away from things like that have supported the G8?
Okay, one more question. How about right there at the front?
Hello, going on from that, the thing is Raj, you were talking about food sovereignty, and really nationalism is where we should go and stop all the freedom of the finance and freedom of food, etc., going across borders. But the right take hold of that, not the left. The left are always about multiculturalism, etc., etc. And as you were saying about Abe, I mean, I think it's very interesting what's going on in Japan, but he's a very nationalistic politician. But he's part of a bigger group, so they'll keep him in line. But where can we get this narrative for the left that we have to look after ourselves when the right grab hold of that all the time?
Very, very good question. Is that something that we confront quite often? You don't want to feed it in the hands of the fascists, of course, but at the same time, you know you need more locally, more democratic governance systems. So I'll hand that over to you, Raj.
Those are great questions. Thank you. I mean, an interesting place to look at this, we'll start with the nationalism thing, is in Italy, where there's right now the rise of the far right, well, the rise of the right, not the far right, merely just nasty right. Up north has led to a situation where in one city they've decided to impose a kind of cultural chauvinism, and so that they want to ban kebabs for being un-Italian, and instead want to celebrate, you know, pasta, which of course comes from China, with tomato sauce, which comes from the New World. So it's a very sort of weird historical remembering. But the interesting thing about Italy is also it's the home of slow food. Now, many of you will know slow food as a kind of circle jerk of olive oil fanciers and red wine fetishists. But slow food is, it's important to remember the history of slow food. Slow food was started by a bunch of people to the left of the Italian Communist Party, which isn't hard to beat. But these are people who observed the sort of the arrival of McDonald's and were interested in democratizing the two things that you need to have in order to be able to eat well. They want to democratize pleasure, and so what they needed to have was more, you need time and you need money. So in order to democratize pleasure, so you need time and money. How do you get that? You do it by organizing. And so the people who started slow food spread the sort of gospel of joy, that everyone should have joy and pleasure, by fighting for workers' rights and then fighting for a shorter workday. Now that seems to me two things that are very much part of a left agenda. That if, you know, and of course this is a lovely thing about using food as a way of thinking about left politics, is because normally on the left it's always about, we must give this up and we must flagellate and we must wear hair shirts. But all of a sudden, if we can have nice olive oil and red wine, well, that's not bad. And certainly, I mean, I think that's also an important way of getting back at this nationalist narrative. I mean, growing up in Britain, of course, in the 70s, the national cooking technique was boiling. And most food tended to come that way. And so I'm very happy to celebrate the globalization of the curry, for example. But that doesn't mean that the ingredients have to come from India. It can be that hence the chicken tikka masala is a wonderful kind of idea of globalization at work. But it can happen with local ingredients. And I think that there's a way then that we can talk about deglobalization as a way of reconnecting with the local food system. And I think that gets to the question around, well, obviously peasant economy and self-sufficiency is one thing, but what's that to do with food sovereignty? Now, bear in mind, food sovereignty is not about autarky. It's not about self-sufficiency. Food sovereignty is very different from self-sufficiency. Food sovereignty is about having a conversation around your food policy. And what Via Campesina was interested in here is they're not against exchange. They think exchange is fine. They think that actually the ideal market where people are uncoerced and can exchange freely, that's something to aspire to. But just as fascism is kind of anti-market, so is capitalism. Capitalism is against the market too. What we have in food capitalism is absolutely coercion, marketing, and reduction of choice into a few processed ingredients. And so shrugging off those kinds of politics, and in fact going and thinking more about how more food needs to be urban and peri-urban, more of our food needs to be sourced locally, that's a start. But eating locally doesn't solve some of these problems. I mean, food sovereignty, eating locally is a necessary but not sufficient condition of food sovereignty. Food sovereignty is about having democratic discussions around how food in urban areas happens, for example. And so the examples that I like to point to in North America are things called food policy councils, where you have a mixture of small businesses and local government and food activists and parents and people who are interested in public feeding programs and Meals on Wheels and what have you, getting together to figure out how it is that everyone gets to eat in the city. And so the idea of a food policy council is ultimately to render food banks obsolete. And those discussions are examples of food sovereignty. Certainly farming systems are a part of this. And, you know, thinking about urban gardening and thinking about our relationship to the rural hinterland and relationships to labor and thinking about redistribution and thinking about gender politics, all of that is part of it. But I mean, it can look superficially like everyone's just being sort of bourgeois and going, you know, and eating local. But behind it is actually much deeper politics of redistribution and of localizing an economy that actually does look like deglobalization. And I'm kind of excited by those examples that are happening across North America. There are about 200 food policy councils at the moment, started in Toronto in the 1980s as a response to long lines outside food banks. And I think that they're sort of inspiring examples for urban areas where the majority of us live.
If you take the examples of deglobalization and feeding into the far right, the left feeding the right.
Well, those are very wide-ranging questions. Just to give a few examples, very concrete examples. There's a town, we were talking about this yesterday. There's a town in Spain, in southern Spain, which is called Marinaleda. I don't know how many of you have heard of this town, no? Marinaleda, you might know that Spain is the European country with the highest level of unemployment, official unemployment anyway. Marinaleda is actually full employment in the region in Spain where there is the highest level of unemployment. And why is this? Because it pursues a policy of deglobalization, as it were. It refuses to abide by the logic of markets because, for instance, the housing market there does not exist. It is fully subsidized by the local city council, and the head of the city council was actually arrested because of this. And it has actually fueled a movement in that region in Spain to expropriate property owned by banks because of evictions. So if banks dare to evict people and keep houses to themselves, the state, the community, Andalusia, will be able to expropriate the houses, put them in a social housing market, and give the houses back to people. So that for me is an instance of decommodification and also deglobalization. Another example. There's a very interesting example of workers taking power in Greece, a factory called Viome. I don't know if any of you heard of this. This is it's also almost a textbook example of workers taking power, and if you look at Argentina in 2001, this is almost exactly what's happening in Greece now, in northern Greece. So the former owners, they charged up the company with debt. They left the company, they went to the Bahamas or whatever, and workers were left without pay for 2 years. And they managed to survive with local solidarity. And now what happened was they managed to get support from the city council. They took ownership of the machinery, and they just 2 months ago they restarted production. And they spoke to customers, they spoke to the local community, and they expect to break even this year, which is amazing because they are cooperatively run. There is no chairman, there's no nothing. It really is a form of showing the wider Greek society that it is possible to achieve to achieve to get in another way of production, and to face globalization head on and say that that's not actually the only way to do that. And that feeds into the next question of the left feeding the right, if I understood that correctly. Well, I think we always run that risk. I mean, for instance, Attac was formed because there was an editorial in the French edition of Le Monde Diplomatique, the original edition, called Disarm the Markets, calling for, I think in Britain you know the tax as the Robin Hood tax. In continental Europe you usually know it as the FTT, the Financial Transactions Tax, or the Tobin tax. Now what's happened was that 11 European Union members co-opted the idea and are about to pursue their own version of the FTT. And it's not clear what they're going to do, because I'm not going to go into the technical specifications, but we as a European network do not agree with the technical specifications, and we perceive that tax to be put forward in favor of the financial industry. So we need to keep on. We even thought at a point, well, if they're going to implement the FTT, well, what are we doing? Maybe we should just close down shop and go do something else. And then we went on to look at the actual specifications and what they intended to do. Well, apparently we do not need to close shop. We need to go on working even harder than before. So it was actually a kind of a process of a flow from an idea which we fought for, we are fighting for since the last 15 years, being co-opted by the right, because almost all of these governments are right-wing, are on the right, and that's one way to see it. And the step for me is embedded in the leftist tradition, because the leftist tradition, if you look at it, its evolution, for me it's a very important part of it. It's internationalism. It's at least from certain traditions, it is very important to keep this mindset and this frame of mind, because that is also the way in which we in Portugal, we in Greece manage to fight certain tendencies to demonize German workers, for example, to say that there is this very strong tendency to put down these outdoors and these posters with Merkel with the Hitler mustache and doing the little sign. That's also a way to fight that in a very concrete way. Wrap it up. So the narrative. I know I come from the south. I am long-winded. I know. So these kinds of narratives, they are. I don't think we should underestimate their power. The power because they build on commonsensical ideas and stereotypes, and we need to fight them. But we need to fight them with what we think is right. And something is right, is correct, it is just. And that's something that the left, for me, in my view, and I think in our view as a movement for global justice, sometimes do not take into account, because sometimes we say that we think this is just, this is correct, but we don't actually build upon that, and we need perhaps sometimes to go back to that kind of thing. And I'll leave you with just this thing. Mélenchon in France, the way in which he built the Front de Gauche was he didn't actually talk about the future, he talked about the Paris Commune. And that actually had a huge effect in Portugal, in Spain, in Greece, because people connect to the ideal of the French Commune. And that's probably not we're not going to change the system by appealing to the French Commune, certainly, but that perhaps is an example of how to build a stronger left message for the future. Yeah.
Thank you. We're eating into our lunchtime. Raj, do you have one last comment that you want to make to put you on the spot here, people, or about it?
Communism. Is good. I think that if we're interested in a food system that is decommodified, that involves relationships of equality and of an end to the sort of corporate power that's been amassed. We do need to have a vision. And I think that one of the successes of the right and of neoliberalism has been to expunge memories of the past and of dreams of things being better. And I think that there's, just merely to say the word communism is provocative, but it shouldn't be. And to talk about anarchism is important. And these words have actually been taken away from us by the political discourse of the day. And I think remembering that that's actually how a lot of the movements in the Global South work and ideas to which they aspire, I think it's important and inspirational.
One word of inspiration? Luís?
Communism.
Oh.
What else?